Welcome, guys, to another episode of Desi Pod with your hosts, myself, Snan, Abdurrahman, and Isaac. So, being Asian, is the community lost? That's the point we're going to raise today. When we were growing up, I remember a vibrant community where us Asians would know each other's businesses. We would always walk out in the street and we knew every person. And my dad would say to me, he's your uncle, she's your auntie. Little did I know that we weren't blood related, but we had that level of respect. We'd respected our boundaries. If my neighbor went to my dad and said, listen, I've seen your son on the bottom of the street and he's up to no good, I knew I was going to get a tongue lashing from my dad. And that was because my dad always trusted the people's opinion. And he always said, you know what, if my son's out on the road at this time of night, you better tell me. And that's how we grew up. We had those boundaries. We had respect for each other. And nowadays, unfortunately, you can't even say out to your own nephew. You might say to him, listen, you're doing something wrong. He might turn around and say to you, well, you're not my dad. Where is this Asian community gone? It's lost. In my heart, I'm saddened to know the fact that it's disintegrated over time. Do you think the Asian community that we grew up in 20, 30 years ago, is it still around? Are there people still trying to hold on to it? Or have people decided to shun it and walk away and say, do you know what? That's the past. Let's move on to bigger and better things. And have we moved on to bigger and better things by leaving our roots as we know them?
Yeah, I think there might be remnants of it, but at least based on my own experience and what I observed, I think we've lost a lot of it. What made our community so strong in the initial years? I mean, I'm old enough to remember what 30 years ago, 40 years ago looked like. And yeah, back then, as you said, Hassan, it was all about that community spirit. It was very, very strong family values. It was very strong extended relatives, for example, going out there, meeting your uncles, your aunties, your cousins. It was just a normal thing. But even beyond that, the people in your neighborhood. I mean, I remember as a child, my some of my earliest memories, Hassan, was going to your house. Right, we lived two doors away from each other, and I used to go to your house. It used to be a regular thing. Meet your brother, meet your mum and dad. All I was always welcomed, so well. I still remember those warm memories. And likewise, you coming to my house. It was
Yeah.
just a very very common thing. It's what made us who we are, I think, and the fact that we have that really close bond. But that was because we paid so much attention. But even looking at the neighborhood as well. We used to go out. We used to play outside all the time. We used to know all the kids in the neighborhood. We used to do all sorts of shared activities. And I think back then, because maybe partly is this that we didn't really have a great deal of technology. We didn't have any mobile phones. We had the basic of computers. Even video games were very basic at that time, which meant that we were actually really forced to interact with each other on a social level, and that meant physical interaction. I remember, when I wanted to, play with my friends, and you and your brother still are my closest friends, but back then, we were children, and if I wanted to call you outside, right, I'd have to either knock on your door, speak to your parents, and call you out physically, or I'd have to, ring your home, through the landline, speak to your parents, who would then put me through to you. But that kind of interaction meant that we had a really, really strong bond. I think we've lost a lot of that now. It's replaced with mobile phones, it's replaced with social media, it's replaced with multiplayer video gaming. You know how much of a craze that is with the kids these days. You don't really have that as much. But just the fact that you were consistently meeting each other physically is something that our elders absolutely emphasize. So I remember my parents would physically drag me to my relative's house, and they would introduce me to the relatives, and then relatives would come to my house. And it was just a normal thing, and it really instilled within us a very strong set of family values, which still carry with us today. And I'll give you a kind of prime example, going back to what you said, Hassan, about respecting elders, right? This was like a common thing for us. Is like, okay, if you see an elder, he's older than you, no matter how old he is, he's your uncle. If she's older
Mm.
than you, she's your auntie. And I kid you not, and even now, right, when I see an elder, I see somebody elder, however old they are, intrinsically there's something within me that I want to greet him, because that is how what my parents taught me, that if you see an elder, you greet them, you show them that respect, and it's part of your emotional makeup. And I think our upbringing has a lot to do with that. Not to say it was perfect, By no means am I saying that any of it was perfect, but I think that those family values and that community spirit was incredibly strong back then. I don't see as much now.
No, you're totally right. And just on that point, when we would see an uncle or a person, or if he was my dad's friend, and I would say, "Uncle, how you doing?" And it was a special time. I mean, growing up in the '90s generally, and I'm talking to all the '90s babies out there growing up in that time. I think the '90s was just a special era in time. It was just when we used to go out and play football in the cold, cricket in the summer. Everybody knew everybody in the street. I was just driving up my dad's street the other day, and I was looking at all the homes, and look, they're exactly the same numbers. They may have put liquor paint on the doors or changed the double glazed windows. It was single glazing in those days, but and I'm looking, I'm thinking, I don't recognize anybody here. Everybody has just left the area. They've just left, and I was thinking, okay, to a certain extent, it's good to progress, but where have they all gone to? And I was speaking to a friend not so long ago. I was talking to him, and we were just on about. He was saying, Snail, back in the days, we just knew each other. I would go into my neighbour's house or go into my auntie's house, knock on the door, or I didn't even knock on the door. I would just walk in, open the fridge, eat something, sit down, and it was like their house was my house and my house was their house. But now we have to book an appointment in advance, send it via email or a text message. He's trying to be funny there, but you catch my drift. And you had to wait for the response from the other person. You just couldn't just come outside or with your whole family and just expect them to be inside and let you in. But that's how it was in our days. Our families would just go to each other's homes and we would just go in and vice versa. It was normal. But unfortunately, I don't think we've got that no more. And it's upsetting. It's the way the world is. Everybody's consumed in their own activities. And it's almost like, can we beat this other family in terms of what we do? I went on this holiday. We never had that braggadocious type of lifestyle. My father, bless him, and I believe all our parents could be in the same position here. What my father gave me and my mother was time. They spent time with us. Nowadays, well, let's go buy him this and let's go buy him. We're just so caught up in this consumerism way of life. But it's like, so what do you think, circling back to your point, do you feel that the whole idea of the Asian community, unfortunately, is starting to disintegrate? And do you think we can still revive it in a way, or has it just gone to that point of no return?
Yes, thank you both. And I think it's important making that distinction because at the onset we said is the community. That what we mean is the sense of that Asian community that we've all, many of us, and as children of the 70s, 80s, and 90s will testify, the conversation's always been about community, culture, and identity. I think what you have said has resonated. It's brought back many memories of how life used to be. Interesting, you mentioned about people coming. People would turn up. You'd get relatives, you'll get friends, you'll get people that knew your parents, to people that knew you, that would turn up. And I actually miss that because you don't get that anymore. You don't get people necessarily visiting each other. You don't get that level of conversation, that level of engagement with wider people outside your immediate family. Partly because if you think of how many people from the Asian subcontinent came to live in this country, they migrated, they were single, they lived in multi-occupancy households with others either single or other married couples, and that developed a sense of extra community, and this became their extended family. So that loyalty was there for a long time. As their own families have grown and developed, and they've had children, their children have had children, suddenly that linkage has disappeared. And as those elders have started to pass away, it has impacted how that next generation interacts with each other. But also, if you think of the mannerisms of the land and the etiquettes of where we live, they have become more and more installed in that next generation. So, like you actually mentioned it earlier, actually telephoning now before you turn up, getting an appointment, making sure that the person's ready. It's become there's been a lot more obstacles. I've heard of people recently. So I remember when your relatives would visit from out of town, it would be a custom and it would be the norm for them to stay with you, and you'd get a spare bedroom ready, or you'd end up rejigging your house. So whether it's if you've got brothers or sisters, you'd all go into one room so that your guests could have 2 or 3 rooms to themselves. Whatever, you had that sense of family, that sense of friendship there. Whereas now you're hearing more and more people, if they visit, it's not that often. When they do visit, they'll actually book a hotel and rather than actually stay within the family home, and almost becoming an arm's length interaction, and I think that is sad. And it's interesting to remember, as you guys were speaking before, I recalled an instance because you mentioned about correcting youth these days. I remember growing up, and me and my mates were actually playing in the field, and behind the field there was a substation, and our ball had rolled into this electricity substation. Back then, they were surrounded by metal railings, and we'd actually had to go through the metal railing to just get the ball out. And one of the elders actually spotted us and grabbed us by our ear, gave us a telling off, and marched us home. We didn't shout at him, we didn't swear at him. We were Uncle G, sorry, Uncle G, we were not going to do it again. He gave us a roller king, our parents gave a roller king. You would never see that now. Rather, now, if you tell somebody, actually, bro, man, what are you doing there? That's wrong. That's inappropriate. Irrespective of what age they are, they could be younger than you, they could be older than you. That sort of correction now, you'd get a proper either stern telling off, or the person would almost develop an enmity towards you, and you're like thinking, what's happened? I still remember that elder now, and may God cure him, because he's actually developed Parkinson's, and I remember him in my prayers and my supplications. Completely different world that we live in now.
I know it's the sad state of times, and being nostalgic and looking into the past, and it puts a smile on my face. I mean, there's times when I'm driving and I'm absolutely down, and the weather now, I mean, look at it, it's grey skies, it's raining, and then just a thought will just pop in my mind. I'll be like, yeah, I used to love the rain when I was a kid. I used to play football in the rain. My mum used to call me out, and if I couldn't hear my mum, my neighbours would say, listen, your mum's calling, you need to go home. And that's how it was. It was just a beautiful thing. We used to all pray together. Remember the times when we used to all, there was about a good 15 of us, and we used to go pray together in the masjid, and we used to come back on the masjid, and during the summer periods, we used to stand outside till late, early morning hours, and we used to just converse and talk about just things that, if you can recall now, it was just football, it was just normal day-to-day chat, and it was just good. Now I feel as though I don't even know my neighbour. I kid you not, I come in and I think, I don't know who you are, and you don't even know who I am. I've even got a Ring doorbell on. Everybody's got a Ring doorbell on, and it's almost like, have they got that just to see snoop on people coming in and out? That's how it's become. It's depressing, but it is what it is, and we've got to understand that. I'm still grateful for the fact that where there is a massive Asian community, we are still holding on to it, especially our generation. We're still holding on to it. God knows what will happen when we reach the age of 60, 70, and when we have grandkids. They might put us in the home and say, well, we're going to see granddad today. I mean, that's how I envisage it, God forbid, but you just hear those shocking stories, don't you, where people are in that sad state of affairs. So do you think we can somehow, well, I'm lost for words, but do you think we can actually revive this community? If we can, what should we do now? If we've got young kids, what can we do right now to somehow hold on to what our parents gave us?
It's a really good question, but it's not something that I necessarily have a good answer to. But just initial thoughts, isn't it? Because what our parents really did is they demonstrated those values by doing. They didn't just talk about them; they actually did them. That means teaching us right from wrong, teaching us respect for elders, dragging us to our relatives, even if we didn't necessarily want them, right? Eating together as a family, was having set times and set meals where we'd get together as a family, and all of the things that we talked about, our friends as well, and certain boundaries are things that we couldn't necessarily cross. So just as you were talking there, Hassan, I remember, when we were younger, we knew we had like a curfew, didn't we? We're like, okay, beyond like this time, we have to be back at home. And
Yeah,
if we
indoors,
didn't,
yeah.
we would genuinely be fearful about what our parents would say had we not adhered to that curfew. So consequences, absolutely. Sometimes, our elders, they would just need to give you a stern look, and that was enough. You knew
Yeah.
full well that you had transgressed the bounds a little bit. And I was speaking to my brother about this as well. I says, the ultimately emotional boundaries, the ability to discern between right and wrong, that emotional boundary is set by the parents, right? Because they tell you what is right and wrong. And if you do wrong, they will let you know it's wrong. And if parents don't instill those boundaries within them, then that lack of boundary stays with you pretty much for the rest of your life in some way. So anyway, back to the point. It is demonstrated by doing. I think our generation was a little bit different because there was almost an emphasis, right? Because you enjoyed being around the family, extended relatives, whatever. You kind of wanted to fly the nest a little bit. So you went out, you got yourself educated, you tried to establish a career, you did all of those things because you thought they were necessary to do it. I'm not saying they aren't, but perhaps we kind of ran to the other end of the extreme by, saying, okay, we're just going to establish our own careers, we're going to live independent lives, and we forgot again those core values that made us who we were and made us so strong as a community. So I would say it is upon our generation, because it's people our age that have now become parents, right? That are the elders of the next generation. But you've got to appreciate what those values were, believe in them enough, and then demonstrate them to your children for you to have any chance of passing them on.
Completely concur. And I think as we've talked about, how we're holding on to that nostalgia. But again, if you look at how technology has evolved, back then people didn't have telephones, they didn't have emails, they didn't have video conferencing, be it FaceTime, be it WhatsApp, be it the likes of those apps that you can get. There was no social media, there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no Snapchat. So they wouldn't necessarily meet family members. So, they would have left family in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, and the likes. And, there'll be many, many years before they see them again until they had enough money to go visit. We can talk about those lengthy visits because that's another nostalgia Asian tradition that many of us grew up with. But because of that, because they didn't have that, they made more of what they did have. Those interactions with those work colleagues, those interactions with the people from your village,
Yeah.
your co-workers, that whole extended new version of your family, and that hybrid family developed, didn't it? The people that you worked with, the people who you immigrated with, the people who you first stayed, shared a house with. You suddenly had these different circles of close friends who were literally like your extended cousins, because you were close, you knew everything about each other, you looked out for each other. Uh, the men hung out, the women hung out. A whole set of brotherhood and sisterhood developed, partly because the only interaction they had with their own siblings and own parents back in their homelands was through letters, which back then airmail would take anything between 2 to 4 weeks, and sometimes it wouldn't even arrive. I know even to this day there are people that talk about, well, such and such sent us a letter and it never came. And because he didn't have that, I guess this was the next best thing. And maybe because technology has now enabled us to have a better link with siblings and the likes, and maybe that's why we don't value those other interactions. But then some of the other values that we had, like, I'm sure we can all recall, but back in the day as we were growing up, not everybody would have had TVs, not everybody would have had telephones in the house. So you'd actually go and you'd actually, use your neighbour's telephone, or your neighbour would come to yours to use your telephone, or somebody from back home, when once telephones did actually develop, would actually telephone your house. And then normally it would be us as kids, would go running to the neighbour's house and say, oh, somebody's calling from wherever in their homelands it was, and then they would come to your house and use a phone, and you would do vice versa if you didn't have a phone. So it's interesting to see how all that has evolved.
It's true, and just touching on that point before we conclude, reminiscing on the past, it's our parents. I'm still in awe of my father, and he's always been my role model for me as growing up, and we've had opportunity. When I was growing up, he was like a superhero, and he still is. And granted, now when I got into my later teenage years, we bumped heads, and I argued, and as you do, you go through there's a multiple of issues I go through a teenage. You think you know it all, but now getting to the point where I am having my own children, and I've realized that my father, and I believe all our parents are bringing to this conversation now, they were amazing people in respects that they got to really build solid friendships with people. I mean, my father came here, he only had his sister with him, and that's the only immediate family I've got. I've got my auntie, my puppo, that you would say, and my uncle in London, but everybody else had all, because of my dad's ability to make good friends and understand people for who they are. And I kid you not, if my dad made a call now to any of those friends that he's made, they will turn up within a flash with their family, because that's how he was able to build that relationship. And I just think that seeing all that, what they did, I'm just in awe. Everybody can be in the same position to think, that our parents did a marvelous job. Unfortunately, we're at that point now where they've given us the platform. We've got children of our own, but we don't even meet our nieces and nephews. It's a sad state of affair, but it's up to us to hold on to it or rebuild those bridges that we have somehow burnt, I believe, or we walked away from it. But our parents did a stellar job. They build those communities for us Asians, whether you're from wherever, we're all Asian, right? We're all one, okay? We're all from the Indian subcontinent. They build those communities, and unfortunately, we have come to that point now where we're just moving away from that. And I just feel that the third generation, when our kids grow up, they will probably know the language. I mean, we struggle to communicate with them in our own language, and they just look at you thinking you're speaking alien to them. So to conclude that point, I just got to say, it's become that point where the community is diminishing, it's going, and it's up to us to revive it in certain parts, whether that means getting to know your neighbours or 3-4 neighbours on your street, or even making that going out and speaking to people. I think we need to come out of our own bubble sometimes, and that's where it is. But it's been a great conversation with you boys. I think we could probably go on for hours, and I believe our listeners could probably think, yeah, there's so many things that we used to do, and there's so many things that we used to love about the past. But let's be positive. Let's end this on a positive note. Things were brilliant before. Things have changed now, but not every change has to be perceived in a negative way. Yeah, we have moved on. We have done really well in life. We can stand up tall and with a chest out and say, you know what? We've actually built something from our parents who couldn't speak the language to where we are now. I mean, that's a massive step forward. And our kids are exactly the same. They're in schools now, and there's no different to any other kids out there, but our children are doing really well. So we've got to take that as a positive. Include there. It's been a brilliant conversation. And until next time, guys, keep listening to Desi Pod, your go-to destination for all things Desi.